Josh, I'm ready to take a stab at a top 10. We're trying to get these done a little quicker, maybe not go 2.5 hours like we've been doing, and just get it to 11:30 Eastern. So we need to bust out a top 10. I'm ready to do one if you are. And if you are, let me know. You can go first.
Sure. Do you want to do my top 10 all the way and then yours, or do you want to go 1, 2,
Yeah.
1, 2? We've done it a
No,
couple
yeah.
different ways.
Yeah, go ahead and just do your whole thing.
Okay. So this time, I think I have all the teams' records right, which I got wrong in my head as we were doing this live last week. My top 10 starts with Ohio State. Ohio State played very well today. They continue to perform at a high level. CJ Stroud did not have his best day. Quietly, Ohio State dominated that game on the ground. I don't think Rutgers is a great football team. They're improving, but they're still a bad football team. But right now, Ohio State is playing well defensively, very well defensively. They're playing well offensively. When the passing game hasn't worked, the run game stepped up a little bit, vice versa, really, since game one. They are playing like the most complete team in the country, I think, with the exception of my number 2, Alabama, who is right on their heels. Alabama without Bryce Young is probably a decent notch worse than Ohio State. I am not going to shift Alabama down right now for that. I don't like shifting someone down for an injury that just happened, because I try to evaluate you more on your resume to this point. And if there's one thing we've talked about before that you can excuse, the unique thing is a loss without a quarterback, or a bad performance without a quarterback, or quarterback injury. It is probably the single most excusable thing in this sport. And the crazy thing to me is, despite Bryce Young being hurt, they dominated a top 25 Arkansas team. I never believed that Arkansas was a top 10 team, but they are good. And they are probably, I think, and Daniel, do you agree with me this? I think Arkansas is probably a better team than anyone Ohio State's played. True or false? Do you think, well, and you may be tied up right now, but I think Arkansas
that's fair.
probably beats Notre. I think they probably beat Notre Dame.
Yep.
And they dominated them. And if Bryce Young hadn't gone out, they probably win that game 50-10. So that was a very impressive performance. Looks like right now, I think this game's over. Georgia's going to pull it out 26-22. But for me, they're now number 3. Their early season dominance is still in the back of my mind. They could be sleepwalking right now. They're kind of feels like they're banged up a little ways. They're out of sorts. Now few performances in a row, really, where they've looked really sort of sleepwalking on offense. The defense is very good. The defense is not really that good. I mean, part of the reason this game was close is the defense was giving up yards the whole game. They are not what they were the past couple of years. They're a step or two back, like we talked about in the preseason. The offense is still very efficient, but when it is not in sync and they're not operating properly, they don't have a ton of explosiveness. So they have to be very efficient. I think Georgia keeps the number 3 spot for me because, I've seen some good from them, and I think they can get back to it. They also keep the number 3 spot because I know what the rest of college football looks like. But they are sliding right now. They would not. I don't know that they would be much more than. They're certainly going to be an underdog to Alabama or Ohio State if they played today or played next week, and it might be more than a field goal. My number 4 team right now is Michigan. I'm with you. We had this whole discussion earlier. You should watch the live show if you're seeing this cut up part of the clip. Michigan is playing good football, but they're still playing kind of a janky version of it. McCarthy improvises a lot when he should be hitting an easy play. Defensively, they still play well, but they're not perfect, and there's some chinks in that armor. But they're a little more complete for me than my number 5, which is Clemson. Clemson, I should say. Clemson looks like they're going to pull out this game, which is actually going right now in the fourth quarter against NC State. They are playing a lot better offensively than they did last year. They look like a way more complete team on that side of the ball. Defensively, I know they're banged up. They're not great. And they weren't great before they got banged up. The back end of that defense is not fantastic. They are either going to get to the quarterback and disrupt, or they're going to get challenged. And I do think their potential is as high as anyone. They could easily be one of the top 3 or 4 teams. If the offense improves, I still think I'm still surprised they haven't tried more to get Klubin, the backup K. I'm just going to call them that right now because I can't say it. I feel like they haven't gotten any more involved because DJU does miss a lot of routine plays that really hurts them. I saw that a lot in the first quarter. Still there, but I think they're still cut above. Trying to move through more quickly now. Number 6, Oklahoma State had a good win against Baylor, had a really kind of a statement win against Baylor. I talked before Baylor, that Baylor BYU, where Baylor was at, having lost a game. I don't really know where Baylor is. There was a lot of Twitter discussion about that this week, and all of us were having a hard time really placing them. We feel like there were a lot of analytic silos. BYU was in one of those. You get teams like Washington State or Wisconsin that all kind of played each other, and it turns out that maybe the whole group's not very good. But Oklahoma State is still playing well. They're winning their games. That's enough right now for me to put them in number 6. Tennessee is number 7. They're quietly playing very good football. They're offensively, they're very, very good. Their Heupel's offensive scheme is excellent. Hooker is playing outstanding at the quarterback position. They have a good run game. I hate their defense. Their defense has not been good. I think their defense could get exposed, and I think their defense is probably going to cause them to lose multiple games. But we'll see that when it happens. The same, I could say, could be true of USC. Their offense is a little janky. I think Caleb Williams can show up or not show up depending on the day. Their defense is pretty suspect, but they seem like they're a lot better overall in terms of talent than the rest of the Pac-12. I have an expectation they're probably going to keep winning. I feel like they're probably going to drop a game inevitably. Maybe they drop 2. But I think offensively, if nothing else, they seem like they've got their stuff together where a lot of teams don't. My number 9 is Ole Miss, coming off their win with Kentucky. Their schedule has been weak enough to this point that they are difficult to evaluate. I will tell you a team that is not on my top 10 is Kansas, and it's because they're in the same boat. Kansas's schedule is very, very weak. Most teams with Kansas, I say most teams, there are a lot of teams with Kansas's schedule that would be undefeated right now. I am really happy for them. I'm excited for Kansas, but just being undefeated in and of itself does not make my top 10 based off performance, based on schedule. The team that struggles with Duke is a little bit different than a team in Ole Miss that struggle wins against Kentucky, who's a much higher caliber team. That was a very big win for them against another undefeated. And then my number 10, and everybody take a pause, is Penn State. It's been a long time since Penn State was in my top 10. There are a lot of people that feel like I hate Penn State because I never put them in my top 10. The couple times I do put them in my top 10, it is always a curse, so I apologize in advance. But I think Penn State deserves to be there right now. They've got their run game figured out. They've got a lot of explosiveness in the run game. Clifford is who he is. I think he's serviceable at running the offense. He can be a liability at times. But as a complement to a good run team game, he's a far more effective quarterback. You cannot run the offense through Clifford. You can use Clifford to get the offense in the right play, run it, and then complement the run game. And defensively, I feel like they're sort of turning a corner a little bit. They didn't look, they haven't looked great off and on. I don't know that they look great today. We are very much in the point where if you want to tell me why another team is top 10, feel free. There are not a lot of good options nationally. Northwestern was let me be clear. Northwestern's a horrible football team, right? So when I say they weren't good today, I mean 17-7 against Northwestern and everything else looked awful. But if I'm going to keep Georgia at number 3 against a really bad Missouri team, I have a hard time dinging Penn State. And quite frankly, I don't know who the heck else to really move up because they're just really, I do feel like at least the top 10 is easier because there really aren't a whole lot of other good options in the 10 I just named. I'm curious to see if you're the same, but that's who I got.
Yeah, I'm very similar. And I didn't let y'all know earlier, but I am finishing off the rare breed. I've got the rye downstairs. I don't love it as much as the non-rye version. But yeah, Josh, I too have Ohio State number 1. I think it's funny. There's Ohio State fans. I think there are Ohio State fans in the chat. While you were talking, they were complaining about Alabama's game against Texas. Alabama's game against Texas was another universe a lifetime ago. And Texas, I think, was killing West Virginia just a second ago. West Virginia's not a great team, but like Texas, having prepared for months for Alabama, having a lot of kind of inside knowledge about the program, hosting them, super hot game. Bama sputtered for a little bit. They won the game. I'm not killing Alabama for that at this point in the season.
Texas is capable of playing at a very high level.
Yeah.
And I don't know quite how to react to that Alabama game. They are, if you want to look at the overall talent, I don't think it shows up on the field most weeks, but they are like number 5 and number 6. Their ceiling compared to, if you want to talk that, like compared to the Notre Dame game, their ceiling is a lot higher than Notre Dame's, especially with their quarterbacks or with Ewers.
It's definitely higher than Missouri or Kent State.
We are not going to be able to evaluate that game at any point this year, and we're not going to be able to evaluate Texas at any point this year. Their problem's in consistency, not potential.
Yeah. I've got Alabama at number 2. I think what they did today was super impressive, especially with Bryce Young going down. They didn't panic when Arkansas went on their run. And Milroe held his own. I think they can win some games with him. I don't think they go undefeated this year if he's got to be the guy. But I do think they win a boatload of games. And right now, I'm just really I expect Georgia to kind of flip the switch. And this is now, like you said, 3 weeks in a row where the switch hasn't been flipped. And they did pull a late game win out against Missouri, but my goodness, that's a bad football team. So Georgia's got some issues. And I think that if their defense is that dependent on Jalen Carter and he went down, that's a concern because he's going to have to come off the field at some point. Depth, I got laughed at last week for having Tennessee number 4. I still have them at number 4. I do not like their defense, but I also think that there's warts on everybody on the rest of this list. Like everybody else they've got problems. Tennessee might lose to anybody on this list. They could beat anybody on this list. So y'all laugh at me, but when you laugh at me, post your top 10 and explain your situation. I got Michigan at number 5. I didn't love the performance today, but I also am not going to ding them for basically a 2-touchdown win on the road at Iowa. That to me, like 27 points, they got a lot of points relative to offensive production. So if you're really digging into the numbers, it wasn't a great performance, but 27 points just on its face against that Iowa defense, I think is pretty respectable. Oklahoma State number 6 for me. What they did today, I think was also respectable. That game was not as close as the 11-point, final score or margin would indicate. I'm not sure that Baylor's very good this year, but they are decent defensively. So to put up 36 on them is fairly impressive. I've got Clemson at number 7. And this is interesting because I made a note earlier this week about how Leary's quarterback performance against all the teams they'd faced up to this point was the worst that any of those teams had seen all year, except for 2 games. And these teams have been playing like FCS and bad G5s, and Leary still up, giving 12 yards an attempt to bad G5 teams. So what did he tonight? 4.9. NC State, in my opinion, is overrated. They're not very good. I think that they're, what ECU did to South Florida today, if we're going transitive property, it's impressive, I guess, that they were able to beat them, but it's still ECU. 30-13 is that score with 3 minutes left in the fourth. Bit of a statement win, I think, for Clemson. But this is another game that if you dig into the numbers, DJU, 7 yards an attempt, 209 yards passing total. He ran it okay. Will Shipley, 4.3 yards per carry. They 4.1 overall for the team. They didn't generate, 30 points on 358 yards is wild. Like that's a lot of points for 358 yards. So I've got them where I got them at number 7, but I wouldn't be shocked if they lose 2 games this year. I've got Ole Miss at number 8, but I am also not like the more I see Ole Miss play, the more I think that they're better defensively than they've ever been in the last 3 to 5 years. But offensively, they've taken a pretty significant step back. If this defense played with the offense that Ole Miss had last year, they'd have beaten Kentucky by 3 touchdowns today. So I've got them at number 8, but it's a skeptical number 8. I know somebody in the comments said last week that we just love Ole Miss and we're always trying to put them up there. Tell me who you're putting up there besides Ole Miss. And if it's Kansas, I'm going to tell you you're crazy because, I could see Kansas winning some games and maybe cracking a top 10 at some point this year. But to this point, Ole Miss has played a tougher schedule. I've got Penn State sticking at number 9. I don't love 17-7 over Northwestern. I don't love it. That gives me concern. Clifford was pedestrian today. They couldn't run it today. And that Northwestern defense is good. It's not great. It's not as good as it's been in the past. And I've got a begrudging USC moving back to my top 10 and watch them lose tonight to Arizona State just to spite me. But I, like you, Josh, don't think that defense is very good. But I also think that if you look at the teams that are other candidates to be in the top 10, Utah, maybe, some of these other schools are just not that impressive. So that's my top 10. And like you said, I think it's, Josh, tell me if this is correct. You sort of indicated this. It was easier for me to do a top 10 this week than I think any point in the year so far. Just it's going to get harder because some of these teams are going to lose. But for now, it's like we've got 10 teams that fit and then a bunch of stuff that doesn't fit in the top 10. So at least for 1 week, it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, I said that, and I agree with it. There's probably 1 or 2 more you could make an argument for, but 2 weeks ago, it felt like there were 30 teams I could have ranked top 10. And I'm sure in a couple of weeks, some of these teams are going to lose, and then they're going to get thrown back in the mix with everyone else that we're kind of right now able to sift through due to losses. And to remind everyone, our methodology is generally, if you want to think of it this way philosophically, if you took my schedule and your schedule and we traded places based off how you've done to date, how do we think you would have done with each other's schedules? Is always kind of the way I play it. And so when you talk a team like Kansas, if Kansas traded schedules with Kentucky, Kentucky would be undefeated. So I can't put Kansas in my top 10. And right now with these teams, they all have warts, but I can say they won all their games. So it's not hard for me to say they'd win games with somebody else's schedule, because most teams to this point have like 3 garbage games in there already. They've only played a couple real games. As that number goes from 2 real games, you think 2 weeks from now, okay, well, you go from week 5 to week 7. It's like, yeah, but the next couple of weeks, we're going to double the number of meaningful games that most teams have played. And there are going to be a lot more losses as a result of that, because, every time a meaningful team plays a meaningful team, someone wins and someone loses. Everybody goes 500 on average. So the number of teams with losses and warts is going to get a lot more muddled, a lot more mixed. And this has been a nice reprieve, and I know it's about to get a lot more difficult all over again.